I love you for sentimental reasons. I hope you do believe me. I'll give you my heart. I love you, and you alone were meant for me.
My name is Jerry Abrams. My real name is Gerald Abrams, and I was born in 1939.
My father, Jerry Abrams Sr., by all accounts lived a pretty fulfilling life. He was a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. He experienced a lot in his 67 years, from his boyhood in Louisville, Kentucky, until his retirement in North Texas. 10 months before his death in December 2006, he shared his recollections of personal experiences and historic events that occurred during his lifetime. His wife, Norma Mattingly Abrams, shared her memories of their lives together too. Because this is really a story of two lives, intertwined, that formed a partnership and successful marriage spanning 45 years. He was born February 21, 1939 at St. Anthony's Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. His brother Chuck was already 2 years old. The boys were the children of Mary Rosalie Highkemper Abrams and Charles Leroy Abrams, who went by the name Pete.
My father's people were Protestant, no particular denomination, but as I recall, my grandparents went to church at Church of Christ.
But young Rosalie was raised Catholic, and soon she was smitten with a young, dashing soldier, Protestant or not.
Of all the boys I've known, and I've known some, until I first met you, I was lonesome. And when you came in,
Well,
dear, my heart grew light, and this old
she was
world
about
seemed
17. He was, 5 years older maybe, and her parents weren't too happy about her wanting to get married, since they weren't going to allow them to get married normal way. I guess they went to Jeffersonville in Indiana, and I don't know what the deal is, but apparently in Indiana you didn't have to wait or something, and young people could get married there, so they got married there, and then they, I guess, went on home as if nothing happened. So.
Though young and struggling during the Great Depression, they were happy. Pete had a job with the Fisher Meatpacking Company in Louisville, and he felt luckier than most.
Big outfit in Louisville. They packed a lot of pork, had a lot of sausage and hot dogs and bratwurst and things like that. And if I recall, he, at least at the time he died, he was a salesman. They worked in the office and they took orders for grocery stores and then they sent them out. He started off working on the trucks doing deliveries.
The couple settled into a starter home raising young Charlie and then baby Jerry. But soon after Jerry's birth, Pete became seriously ill with Addison's disease, also known as adrenal insufficiency. The disease incapacitated him quickly, and he was bedridden.
They had bought a house, if I recall correctly, and were there when I was born. So, but when he got sick and with his Addison's disease or whatever, and was bedfast, they moved in with my grandmother so she could take care of him. And my mother said she let the house go back, which is I assume it was bought on a contract for deed, and when you quit paying on it, that's the end of it. So.
Pete was only 26 when he succumbed to the disease. Baby Jerry was only 11 months old at the time and grew up with no memories of his father. After his father's death, Jerry and then 3-year-old Chuck found someone else to fill the father figure role.
Well, I guess it'd been my grandfather, my father's father. That's a strange situation. After my father died, there was my mother with the 2 children at the cemetery, and she said her parents just walked away and went home, and then my dad's mother came over and told her, "You go home with us," and she did. So we lived then with my dad's parents, and I suspect maybe there's some kind of acrimony with their own parents.
Until I smile at you.
Before the war, he worked at Fort Knox, building barracks for the soldiers. And after the war, he worked as a security guard. And as I remember, that's what he always did. I know he was a kind of a carpenter, and he did a little work like that on the side sometimes. He also did some landscaping work. At one time, you have to remember the Depression changed everybody's way of life, and he had worked for the Louisville Water Company, which was a political patronage job. And what he did there was groundskeeping. And he knew quite a bit about horticulture, landscaping. I don't know how he happened to lose that job, whether it was because of the Depression or something, I don't know. But anyhow, he lost that job. Had to be tough in the Depression. We lived in the Clarksville housing project in Louisville after about 1940, 41, I think. My grandparents had lived on Roofer Avenue in Louisville, and then I don't know when this Clarksville housing development came about, but then we moved over there. It was nice apartments, and anyhow, we could catch the bus right at the door, which was an interurban bus that went to Germantown, and so we often load up on a Friday and take the bus and spend the weekend with my other grandparents.
Not long after my father was taking his first baby steps, and less than 2 miles away, my mother was born in Louisville's Germantown neighborhood.
I was born on January the 23rd, 1940, in Louisville, Kentucky. I was the 5th child to to G. Paul Mattingly and Teresa Schweppe Mattingly. I was born at home at 1026 Lydia Street on a cold Tuesday night when it was snowing very hard. The doctor was unable to reach the house, and my mother's older sister, Philomena Schweppe Meyer, delivered me in the bedroom at 1026 Lydia Street at 8 o'clock in the evening.
Norma's mother, Teresa Schweppe, was the fourth of 7 children, but only 4 survived past their first year. Teresa was born in 1906 and grew up alongside her surviving siblings, Minnie, Clarence, and Clara.
My mother was actually born in Indiana, St. Henry, Indiana, and she moved from there at the age of 3 into Louisville, Kentucky, and with her parents, and lived there ever since in Germantown, Kentucky, and Louisville. Her parents were of German descent and spoke quite a bit of German in the home. Their parents were the immigrants, but they still spoke quite a bit of German to each other mostly. My mother could speak quite a bit of it at a young age and lost a lot of it when she got elderly, except for her ability to sing songs in German.
Norma's father, Paul Mattingly, was the 6th of 13 children. He was born in 1903 and grew up on his family's farm in Loretto, Kentucky.
Well, my father's parents died when I was pretty young. I don't remember my father's mother at all. I mean, all I would know from her would be pictures. I understood she was like 4'11", and from pictures I saw was about that big around. A lot of people used to tell me I looked like her, and it used to scare me to death that I would ever be that big around. But my grandfather was extremely tall. Compared to her being 4'11", he was like about 6'3". And I know he was a farmer, and like I said, they had 15 children, all single births. And as far as I know, all he ever did was farm on the big farm there in Loretto. And of course, they had several boys and a lot of girls. And I guess at that time, that's how you fed that many children. My grandmother, I think, died. Maybe I was 4. I figured that out one time, and I think I was like 6 when my grandfather died. And all I remember of that was he was laid in his coffin in the entry hall of their home at the farm.
Norma's parents were introduced at her mother's childhood home in Louisville's Germantown neighborhood in 1925 and were married the following year.
I was told that he came to my mother's house with a mutual friend. Just that there were several children and he was in town. Like I said, he was from Marion County, Kentucky. And he came with a friend just that knew some of her brothers and sisters and knew that people were always there, and that's where he met her.
After the idyllic romance of courtship, married life proved more difficult for Teresa and Paul, as the first of many children came along right at the onset of the Great Depression.
When they were first married, they had hard times during the Depression years, and they moved from their home in Louisville back to the farm in Loretto, Kentucky, in order to survive through the Depression. After the Depression got better, they moved back to Louisville, and he went to school and became a master plumber. At that point, I think he only had finished 9th grade education in a country school, one-room school.
During this period, Paul could best be described as a functional alcoholic, going to work each day but drinking heavily in the saloons afterwards. Teresa proved to be a resourceful woman who didn't shy away from hard work to help support her growing family.
I'm not sure just what she did before she was married, because she was 21 years old. I'm sure she worked. She worked periodically off and on, and at the time when they moved back to Louisville and my father went to school, she worked at the cotton mill in Louisville, and where they made threads and things that had to do with materials. and I believe it was on Goss Avenue in Louisville, Kentucky, and she worked that even during one of her pregnancies.
It's a blue world from now on.
Tragedy struck before Norma's first birthday, when she lost sight in her right eye due to an incident or accident that still remains a mystery.
There's been so many speculations in my life. Some people think I fell on a toy. Some people thought a neighbor child struck me with a stick while I was in a playpen. All I really know is that it was not a disease, it was an injury. And apparently, a few hours after whatever happened, the eye was protruding, red, raw, angry looking, and was taken to emergency room. They did 3 operations trying to save the sight in the eye, and by that time it had gotten so infected and had gangrene that my parents were told to either give permission to remove the eye, or the gangrene would go to the other eye and blind me, or possibly do brain damage and you would have a retarded child. Of course, it was a very hard decision, I'm sure, to make, that they did make to take the eye out. I was in the hospital for 3 months. I came out of the hospital on my first birthday weighing 14 pounds and had already had an artificial eye inserted into my socket to keep it from shrinking. In my lifetime, as a child grows, the eye had to be enlarged to go along with the size of the eye growing, and they were made of glass, which continued to be broken. As a child in a stroller, if it irritated you, it was easier just for a child to knock it out, hit the sidewalk, break, and there you go, buy another one. It had to be an extremely difficult situation for my mother. And like I said, with my father's drinking problem, that was just one more reason to drink a little bit more.
Just a couple of months before Jerry's 3rd birthday and Norma's 2nd, the nation was plunged into the Second World War.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I remember it seemed quite strange that other people's fathers were in the service, but mine wasn't. However, he was what you called an air raid warden.
And has equipped it with all of the items listed in the air raid warden's handbook.
Well, Sam, it's the 3rd night of our blackout. I wonder if enemy planes are really headed this way. I'll let them come. Our boys are ready, and so are we.
When you had blackouts during World War II, we all sat in the house, and all the lights had to be off, and he went up and down the street to make sure no one had lights on in their house. This had something to do with, in case we were ever invaded, that they didn't want to have lights where they could drop a bomb.
He has convinced them of the absolute necessity of a complete blackout. He has taken the time to show them how to put up blackout curtains that would really do the job, down to the last detail of thumbtacking the curtains to the window frames, so that not a single ray of light can leak through and bring an enemy bomber roaring to the target.
During World War II, he was already the father of 4 children, which would have exempted him at that time. So I do remember the air raids. When the air raids were to take place, sirens went off and everybody turned off lights. And I do remember when the war was over and everyone in the neighborhood came out and cheered and partied up and down the street. And I had a tricycle and someone tied tin cans and things on the back of my tricycle and had me to ride up and down the sidewalk to make noise because everyone was so excited that the war was over and the men were coming home.
The night troops have entered the eternal city of Rome. Sporadic resistance by the
Jerry's
Germans
memories of the
continues.
war mostly involved radio news reports, newsreels at the movie theater, and collecting tin cans for the war effort. Several of his relatives were fighting overseas, including two of Rosalie's brothers, Jerry's Uncle Hank with the Navy and his Uncle John Jr. with the Army. Jr. won 4 battle stars for his involvement in the island hopping campaign in the Pacific, but he was seriously wounded during an amphibious assault when his tank was hit by Japanese fire. Jr. was pulled out of the burning tank and was the only surviving crew member. He returned home after the war and became a successful farmer in southern Indiana. He fathered 8 children with his wife Mildred. He died in 2008.
Blue moon of Kentucky, keep on shining.
When the war finally ended in August 1945, Jerry was 6 years old and trying his best to keep up with older brother Chuck. That would continue for many years to come.
Played baseball a lot in the alley. Played football with a rolled-up newspaper. Played basketball. I wandered around a lot, exploring neighborhoods as far as I could.
Like most kids from their era, Jerry and Chuck discovered comic books at an early age, and collecting comics together helped them grow closer.
I have an older cousin named Sonny. I forget how much older he was, but he was much older, I guess. Anyhow, he came and stayed for a while and left some of his comic books there, maybe about 6 or 7, something like that. Looking back, they were probably original Batmans and things like that, as I recall, but I couldn't even read them. But we hung on to those, and then I guess my brother was probably in first grade by then, and he heard about a lot of kids about trading comics. There were a lot of kids in the project, and we learned a whole lot from them. But anyhow, we started trading comics, and somehow or another we acquired a lot more of them. I don't know if it was slick trading or what, but anytime somebody new moved into the neighborhood or in school, well, first thing we do was ask them if they traded comics, and then we'd go out and take our stack of comics and go trade with them, and then we'd always have new ones to read that way. And we found out that best time to go was on rainy nights. Kids stayed in the house then, see, and weren't interrupted by something going on outside. So we'd pack all these comic books up in shopping bags, and then we had this old oilcloth bag that was was a rag bag, and all the rags went into it. And we'd empty them out, and then we'd put it inside this oilcloth bag, because there wasn't any plastic bags back then. And then we'd put our raincoats on and put this all underneath the raincoat. And then we'd go to these kids' house on a rainy night, and they didn't have anything to do but swap comics. So, oh gosh, sometime we'd have 30, 35 comics that we'd trade. A lot of times we'd have to stop under a street light and read them. It was just couldn't get home fast enough to read these new comics. But, yeah, I read a lot of comics, and that really helped my reading. And I studied the artwork too. That was helpful. I think my favorite probably was Donald Duck. Donald Duck was, the guy that did Donald Duck he expressed a lot of irony in it. And the stories were just so good. And I really liked that. And then I liked Captain Marvel, who was also a takeoff on the Superman. And comical. See, these things were actually kind of comical. And I didn't care much for Superman. I don't know. I'd read anything, but those are my two favorites, probably.
Yes, Captain Midnight, brought to you every day, Monday through Friday, by the makers of Ovaltine, America's favorite food drink.
While comic books were fun, it was the radio that provided the most exciting daily entertainment for both Jerry and Norma.
Oh yes, on the radio I always listened to Ozzie and Harriet because I just thought Ricky Nelson was the bee's knees because he was my age, you see. And let's see, we listened to My Friend Irma, and we had Beulah was on. I probably listened to more shows that little girls would have listened to or the boys would have listened to. Oh, Dragnet and The Squeaky Door, whatever that was. I'm sure your father could tell you all those shows he watched, but I didn't want anybody to think I was a tomboy either.
The creaking
Radio was a very important one. And we always listened to not only the serials, the radio dramas, but a lot of nice music shows. Grand Ole Opry, for instance. And then there was in Kentucky, there was a Renfro Valley barn dance that came from somewhere down in Missouri or somewhere.
Howdy folks, this is John Lance speaking to you from the old Renfro Valley Country Store, Renfro Valley, Kentucky, bringing you a transcribed program for our post-sugar crisp.
Gonna play a few tunes and then we're gonna tell about a lot of things.
Then there was National Barn Dance that came from Chicago, I thought. Besides other music shows with big band and show tunes. So I was exposed quite a bit to music.
I'm back in the saddle again, out where a friend is a friend.
I like Gene Autry songs. Gene Autry was a singer, and he also made movies like a singing cowboy. When we lived in Clarksdale, my grandmother would take us sometime to the Shelmar Theater, which was at the corner of Shelby and Market Street. We'd go over and watch, if there was a Gene Autry movie, we'd watch that.
All right, go by the ranch and pick up your gear. You're through.
I'll tell you, the scariest one I ever saw was Frankenstein Meets the Wolf Man. I was a little kid then, scared the pee out of me. Sometimes I'd go to other theaters, and I didn't like most of those shows that say that my mother would go to see. I don't know why she took me to see Wolfman, but kids used to go to the show on Saturday afternoon. Yeah, I'd see Abbott and Costello and the Three Stooges, cowboy pictures. They usually have 2 features and then some cartoons.
All along the road of life I roam, looking for a place to call my home. Not a fancy mansion nor a bum.
The family had settled into a new home back in 1942 after Jerry's grandfather, Jasper Abrams, bought a house in Germantown. Jasper, Elizabeth, Rosalie, Charlie, and Jerry said goodbye to the Clarksdale housing complex and moved into a modest home on Rutlinger Avenue.
All along the line, it's the same old sign waiting for me.
While the movies were their Saturday afternoon escape, by the early 1950s, there were some very real changes taking place at home for both Jerry and Norma.
When I was small, and all of us were at home, there was like 3 beds in one room, 2 double beds and 1 single bed. And, I had 3 older sisters, so 2 kids to a bed, and then, I don't know, seemed like to me we were never in the same bed. Somebody was always in somebody else's bed. But I had 2 double beds and a single bed in one room. And the other red room my brother had, and a baby bed was in there for my younger brother. At that time, my youngest sister, Paula, slept in a baby bed in my parents' room. So these things periodically changed as children grew older. And at the age of 10, all 3 of my older sisters all married within 1 year of each other. And that would have been like in 1949 and 1950. And so by this time I was like 9 and 10 years old. So it was like we're starting a whole different family life with less children.
And they were married in the middle of May.
Jerry's mother, Rosalie, had been dating an Army War veteran named Bill Elby, and the pair married in August 1949. Bill moved Rosalie and her boys to an upstairs apartment at the home of Bill's brother Charles on Arcade Avenue. Jerry was 10 years old at the time, and Charlie was 12. Less than a year later, Rosalie gave birth to a new son, Stephen William Elby. So Bill began looking for a larger home to accommodate his growing family. He found it in 1951 at 1214 Carico Avenue. Bill and Rosalie had 4 more children together. Next came Mary in 1952, Randy in 1955, followed by Richard in 1958, and finally Sharon in 1961. In the war, Bill requested immediate action. He got it in the Pacific with the Army 5th Air Corps.
Hip, hip, hooray. We're living in the USA. Come on, you Yanks, all holler, say. Hip, hooray.
He was first sent to Australia in June 1942, then saw combat in the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, the Philippines, and other islands.
Hip, hooray.
He was part of an anti-aircraft unit whose job was to defend American airfields. Returning home to civilian life in Kentucky in 1945, he first found work at Louisville Tin and Stove, later L&N Railroad, and in 1948 as a machinist with International Harvester, where he stayed until his retirement in 1982.
I guess I'll have to change my plan.
The move across town meant new adventures and interest for Jerry during his preteen and early teenage years.
In Iroquois Park, there was a pond that had fish in it, and I'd walk out there and fish, ride my bike. Then the Boy Scouts. We spent a lot of time with our patrols, hiking around the Iroquois Park and the area around it, which is pretty much wilderness about that time. We'd spend all day on a Saturday tramping around with our packs and exploring the area. And then we'd set up a tent in the woods somewhere and build a fire and cook. We camping out.
Fishing was something Jerry dabbled in early on with his brothers, buddies, and his grandpa High Camper.
I saw an advertisement for a fishing lure. I'd try to whittle one out and make it and see if it would work. Now, when I was about 11 or 10, 11, something like that, I started fishing with my grandfather sometime. And we'd go to Uncle Gus's place. He had a farm on a creek. They called it Fern Creek. I don't know if it was or not. And there was a private impoundment that backed up on his place. And so we'd fish there in the creek in the backwaters with cane poles.
Those early fishing experiences led to a lifelong pastime for Jerry. No matter how busy life became, he always made time for casting a line, even if he only had time for an hour or so to spare between other commitments. And it was something he enjoyed sharing with anyone who wanted to go along, including Norma, neighbors, nephews, and all 3 of his children.
I wanna go home with you. I wanna go home.
I remember, of course, when I was very young, very few people had a car. I remember the one man that lived in the neighborhood who did not go to the military. He worked at Durkee's, which was on Shelby Street, and he rode a bicycle to work. We did have a car, but like I said, my mother didn't drive, and it was mostly used for Daddy to go to work. And sometimes he rode in carpools because, things were tough after the war. You couldn't get tires for your car and stuff, so you had to conserve everything, at least for several years after the end of World War II. We didn't really have big supermarkets until probably, I would think, like 47, 48. And at that time, I remember they did open a A&P grocery store on Eastern Parkway, which was a little walk. So most of our groceries came from the corner grocery stores. Now there was a corner grocery store on 3 corners straight around, so some things were bought in one store and some in others. At that time, your parent, if you were lucky enough to have a telephone, which we were because my 2 older sisters worked for Southern Bell Telephone Company, and when they went to work, they got to have a telephone installed at a very cheap price. So my mother could pick up the telephone and call the grocery store, give them her order, and they would bring the groceries on a bicycle. They would keep a tab at the grocery store, and on Fridays when your father got paid, they would go to the grocery store and pay for the week's groceries. In other words, if we were sent to the grocery store to get a loaf of bread, you would just say, put it on the Mattingly's tab. And they would take a little tablet booklet and write down how much you spent that day. And that's how we bought our groceries.
Germantown bustled with activity in the 40s and 50s. Most people walked to work or caught a bus. St. Elizabeth Church was a hub of activity for the mostly Catholic neighborhood. There were bakeries, meat markets, and hardware stores. Men gathered at several popular saloons which served up burgers, soup, and cold local beer.
Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get?
In those days, after a hard day's work, it was common for men to stop at a corner saloon for a shot and a beer.
So to the company store.
But the neighborhood kids in Germantown favored at Hawk's store for frosty bottles of soda and penny candy.
Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart.
Our neighbors that lived 2 doors down was a young couple who had a small child. And of course, they were probably the age of my older sisters who had already left home. And their name was Bob and Jean Glock. And I never forget them because they had a television. Being a young couple, the television was probably as big as your dresser in your bedroom, and the screen was about the size of a saucer. And it was round. And they were such nice people that they would let all of us little neighbor kids come in, and we sat on the floor and we watched Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, which was a puppet show. And we just thought that was just the greatest thing in the world.
Here we are, back with you again. Yes, by gum. And yes, by golly. Kukla, Fran. And dear old Ollie. Here we are again. Here we are again. Here we are again. Here we are again.
It was probably, I'm thinking maybe 46, 47. And that was just very unusual for somebody to have a television.
The fascinating new medium mesmerized all kids of their generation, but few of them actually got a chance to appear on television, as Jerry did, thanks to the considerable art talent he exhibited at a young age.
I was on television twice on each of the stations, the 2 stations we had then. And first time, I think, I was interviewed by this person that had a talk show, along with some other kids. I guess they'd had a judging of public school art. I was one of the winners. I wasn't a big time winner, but one of the winners. So they judged one of my pictures, and they showed that picture, and then they interviewed me. And I don't remember a whole lot about the interview, other than that I had to go down on a bus and this television station. This was in the very early days of television. You have to remember, and they'd put anything on television.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, join me home. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes 1. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock.
Well, my father, of course, being a country boy, liked country music. Country music then was more tinny and more like June Carter Cash's parents. And we just thought that was country. So we didn't particularly like it because we didn't want anybody to think we were country kids. So by the time I was, of course, a teenager, rock and roll came in. And I was probably the world's biggest Elvis fan that ever lived.
It was a warm Sunday night in September 1956. 16-year-old Norma Mattingly was supposed to be attending a teen club meeting at St. Elizabeth Church. Instead, she was a couple streets away at her Uncle Clarence and Aunt Bernie's house with her cousins Carol and Doris Schweppe.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Your Mercury dealer and your Lincoln dealer present The Ed Sullivan Show.
Along with most teenagers in America, the girls were waiting to see Elvis Presley's first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. In fact, 60 million people, more than a third of the country, tuned in that night, helping to cement Elvis's status as the world's first rock and roll superstar.
And now, don't be cruel. I can be found sitting home all alone. If you can't come around, at least please telephone. Don't be cruel to a heart that's true. I don't want no other love, oh baby, it's still you are. And I don't know to this day what Elvis had, but he had it.
Both Norma and Jerry were fans of Elvis and Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everly Brothers, and a host of other early rock and rollers who changed the direction of popular music forever.
Dependability is one of the main keys to keeping a job and getting ahead. Now, dependability includes a willingness to work.
Becoming teenagers meant taking on more responsibility and getting a job. Earning pocket money and saving for college and cars were the most important motivators for Jerry and Norma as adulthood loomed closer.
First one I had, I guess I was delivery for a drugstore. Delivered medicine and things on my bicycle. I think I made $8 one week and $12 the next. I worked weekends on the second week, so I made more. It's like 50 cents an hour, I think they paid me. In the summer, I worked in a A&P store in a meat market. And that was what they called a meat wrapper. But actually, I was, weighing out steaks and things and wrapping them and taking care of customers. Then I worked in another drugstore as a clerk. And that pretty well took care of my high school employment.
I worked in high school. Little things. I worked a while in a candy store on Broadway for a couple of months. And I worked at St. Elizabeth's Church in the rectory. I used to file papers, get things ready for the Sunday collection envelopes to be mailed out, things like that. Just jobs that someone with not a lot of experience could do. Didn't make a lot of money, like 50 cents an hour.
But by saving carefully, those early jobs allowed them to buy their first cars.
And what a wonderful choice Chevrolet is. The choice of more people than any other car.
Well, yes, I bought a car in 1953 Chevrolet Biscayne. It was beige with a dark brown top, and it was. I bought it in 1959, within a year after I was out of high school, and I bought it from my cousin, who his wife. And when they were getting married, I guess they wanted to sell one of the cars, so I bought the Chevrolet from her. And boy, it was really classy.
It was a 1948 Dodge, I think. Piece of shit. Paid $200 for it, or $199 or something like that. Too much.
He's duck and cover, duck and cover.
That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it.
American families in the 1950s lived under the constant strain of the Cold War. The threat of communism and nuclear warfare was ever present, but neither Jerry nor Norma remembers dwelling on such fears.
I think we were kind of shielded away from some of that.
It didn't bother me a whole lot. All that stuff we hear about being afraid of the atomic bomb and things didn't bother me at all. I wasn't worried.
A third of the world is communist. Another third is united with us in opposition to communist aggressive designs.
I think, of course, you didn't have the news coverage that you do now. And I think parents were so concerned of what it did to children during the war, the big war, the children who were a little older than me, that they really did try not to stress you out. I remember bomb shelters, and I think we kind of had, I guess it had something to do with the religious background. My mother's theory was, well, those people are building those bomb shelters, but if it's your time to go, that's not going to save you. You're not going to be at home when that happens anyway.
You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington, we'll take Ike to Washington.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country. Vote for Eisenhower.
Eisenhower was very popular,
And I like courage.
and
And tonight I saw an example of courage.
as far as I know, everybody that I ran into liked Eisenhower.
Well, my parents were always Democrats, and I think they would have probably never voted for a Republican. I'm sure never. I think they always felt like that Democrats were for the working, hard-working families, and the Republicans were for rich people, like most people think today. And that was always their thinking. My father came from a farming family. My mother's father worked for the bus company, you know. And I know to the day my mother died, she would have never voted for a Republican.
I've been waiting in school all day long, waiting on the bell to ring so I could go home. I throw my books on the table, pick up the telephone. Hello, baby, let's get some going. Heading down to the drugstore.
Jerry graduated from Louisville's Flagey High School in 1957. He got a job with Bell Telephone and used his employee discount to put the first telephone in his family home.
I know you.
About the time Jerry was starting this new chapter in life, his older brother Chuck struck out on his own to start a family at age 20 when he married his longtime sweetheart, Sylvia Phillips.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
The following year, in 1958, Norma graduated from high school. Like her sisters and cousins, she attended Mercy Academy, a Catholic high school for girls. Norma used her diploma to secure a clerk typist position with the state of Kentucky's Motor Vehicle License Bureau. But after a few months, she found a better job at Jenner Engraving Company, where she learned the printing and engraving trade.
I never considered going to college. It was a thing that very few girls did then, and certainly not if your father was dying of cancer. There was no income. My brother Kenny was older than me, but he was military, did a 2-year stint. And the Red Cross sent him home early because our father was dying of cancer and he was the oldest son. And up until he was able to come home, a lot was just up to me, to help at the house, and a little bit of money I helped make. And then when the Red Cross sent him home, I believe it would have been like in May, and then Daddy died the 5th of July, right after I graduated. So knowing I'm graduating from high school, get yourself a full-time job as fast as you can and help.
About that time, Jerry became dissatisfied with his job at the phone company after being moved to the night shift.
Midnight to 8, I guess. And I was having trouble getting enough sleep. Certainly interrupted my social life. So I left there, and I worked for a little while in a store again, which wasn't too bad because I was making pretty good money at it. But I was working a lot of hours.
I keep my eyes wide open all the time.
In August 1958, Jerry found a pretty good job with the Pillsbury Flour Mills Company in Louisville. The job paid $275 a month plus overtime.
I saw in the paper where Pillsbury was hiring some people, so I went down to see about the job, interviewed, and went to work for them.
One of the fringe benefits about working for Pillsbury was that Jerry's brother Chuck had already been working there since 1956. This meant the Abrams brothers would be seeing a lot more of each other.
We both worked in what they call research and quality control, but he was in quality control and I was in research.
It was around this time that Jerry began taking classes at Bellarmine College and later at the University of Louisville.
I finally got enough money together where I could take a few classes at night, college.
As the 1950s came to a close and the 60s began, Jerry felt he was on the right track professionally and as a part-time college student. But events on the world stage had him worried about his military obligation.
At that time, Vietnam wasn't a problem. They were still lying about what was going on in Southeast Asia. We really didn't know too much about it. But I didn't like the idea of maybe getting drafted and going to either Korea or Germany, cold places.
His best friend John Fugit suggested a way they could fulfill their obligation to Uncle Sam and avoid being drafted as infantrymen in the event of a war.
I joined the reserve thinking, well, if there's a general mobilization, I'll be caught up with everybody else, and at least I won't be in a tank unit in Korea. So.
This modest little tile front building is the Zanzibar. It was once a popular hangout for University of Louisville students and other young people. It was there, late in 1960, when Norma met Jerry for the first time.
They had a jukebox for dancing. I was there with a friend, and she knew him. She knew Jerry, and he was standing there and spoke to her, and he sat down at the table to talk to us, I assumed. But the girl I was with was a very quiet girl, and neither one of them said too much.
First, a boy and a girl meet each other.
So I sat there at this table and knew a lot of other people, so I danced with a lot of other people there that night, and those two just sat there. I thought, he doesn't say a word. He must be a deaf mute. And so he stayed and we stayed, and when we all left and we were pulling away, he was getting in his car, and I looked over at him and I said, Helen, he really is kind of cute. He just doesn't say anything. So I didn't date him right away.
But each step draws you closer to the eye.
A short time later, in January of 1961, Norma and Jerry's paths crossed again at a Catholic social club dance for young adults.
I thought he would be a good catch for my cousin Marlene, because she was extremely quiet. And she had one date with him. And the next day at their house, which I was always there, she was at my house, I said, how did your date go? And she said, not really too good. I'm kind of boring, and he didn't have much to say. And I said, well, if you don't want him, I do. So I figured, well, maybe he isn't so bad. He is cute.
They began seeing a lot of each other and soon realized they had much in common.
Only you can make all this world seem right.
One night we were going somewhere, and he needed to stop by the house to change shirts, because where we were going you had to wear a shirt or a tie or something, and he was in sport clothes. Well, as I might tell you, they had four small children from 3 to like 9 or 10. And he opened the door and said, is everybody decent? And his stepfather jumps up, who's in his undershirt like that wasn't decent, and went to another room and put on his shirt. And I went in and I sat on the couch while he went upstairs to change his shirt. Well, the smallest child was like 3, and he was throwing up in the bathroom, and his mother was in there taking care of a sick child. And I'm thinking, holy moly, this is just like my house.
I'll bet we could get some advice from the marriage counselor over at the church. His name is Hall. Phil told me about him. He teaches a course in marriage and family living at the college.
There was probably an early physical reaction, a romantic attraction that pulled you together, a love appeal that hit you sort of boing.
But we didn't really date long. It was just one of those things that clicked pretty quick.
we took for granted that we were going to get married, I guess.
Really, how do you explain something like that? I dated a lot of people, but they were just somebody you really just, had a good time, went out, and you could walk away from. But there was this magnetism there that you thought, I just don't want to be away from this person.
I joined the Army Reserve and I signed up to go in on active duty for 6 months. So anyhow, I guess by the time I left for active duty, we already, pretty well had it planned.
It was just very fast. Like I said, we met, and to really say we dated in January, and I guess in February he went into the service for 6 months, which he of course was at Fort Knox, but there was that first 6 weeks where he went in, where he couldn't come home on leave.
I was gone for 6 months, so that was part of our courtship, you might say. It was all about letters then.
I wrote a letter every day, and he wrote, I believe, a letter every day. Sometimes I wouldn't get one, but then 2 or 3 would come at one time. But I always wrote every day. And, phones weren't like there now. If he did call me, he'd have had to get in line, wait for a pay phone. There was once or twice that he could have a leave, but only on the military base. And he called me to see if I could come out there. And it was a Saturday. I worked till noon on Saturdays, and I just gotten home, so I drove out to Fort Knox, and we spent the afternoon and evening together. You could go to the little commissary's thing and have a sandwich or something and talk. And then he'd have to, of course, be back in, and then I would drive back home to Louisville.
Except when I got, when I could come home sometime. I decided to get married when I got out.
And so when he came out, which would have been like around Easter, he gave me an engagement ring. Of course, we'd already decided before he ever went that we were going to get married, but he didn't have time to get me a ring before he had to be inducted. So when he came home on leave after basic training, we officially got engaged. He got out of service the 1st of September, and our wedding was the 30th.
See you in September.
I planned the wedding myself. Jerry and I paid for our wedding. I had a beautiful gown that had belonged to a girlfriend of mine that my aunt redid and made to fit me because I was much smaller. She made all the bridesmaid dresses and the flower girl dresses. I made all the headpieces.
My love must be a kind of blind love.
We had a beautiful church wedding. 4 girls, 4 men, a ring bearer, which was Jerry's little brother Randy, and my niece Star Smith were 6 years old. We had a reception at Vernon Hall on Story Avenue. Probably 250 invitations were sent. It was a beautiful wedding, and we did it on a shoestring, and you would have never known it. It's just the way of doing things. And now my mother and my aunt did do the cooking for the wedding. And, we had like ham sandwiches, potato salad, a regular German type wedding, and beer and soft drinks. And of course, a wedding cake. And it was a very pretty wedding.
The moon may behind.
My maid of honor was my younger sister, Paula, and she was like 17. 17. And my cousin Carol was a bridesmaid, and my cousin Marlene, the 2 Schweppe girls, and my friend Chris Miller, who was a close girlfriend, and So there were 3 bridesmaids and a maid of honor, and the flower girl.
Jerry's best man was John Fugit. His groomsmen were his close friends of many years, Bob Hart and Bill Riggs. Norma's younger brother Bill served as an usher.
Well, I remember my brother Kenny gave me away, and as we started down the aisle, I looked up and I said, "There's Jerry," and my brother said, "Well, I hope to hell he's here," which would be typical of him, but like, what a thing to say.
You are here, and so am
I just thought that he was the best looking pretty thing I ever saw in my life.
So, there you have it. The story of my parents Norma and Jerry Abrams. Their childhood, the people who touched their early lives, how they grew up, met, and fell in love. There is, of course, much more to tell, like their career changes, the sons they raised, and the daughter too, and their major move across the country to the Lone Star State.
I can only give you love that lasts forever.
And all the people they met and enjoyed along the way.
And the only heart I own.
But those are stories that will have to wait for another time.
That's all.
Until then,
That's all.
thank you for watching.
I can only give you country walks in springtime, and a hand to hold when leaves begin to fall, and a love whose burning light will warm the winter night. That's all. That's all. There are those, I am sure, who have told you they would give you the world for a toy. All I have are these arms to enfold you, and a love time can never destroy. If you're wondering what I'm asking in return, dear, you'll be glad to know that my demands are small. Say it's me that you'll adore for now and evermore. That's all. That's all. If you're wondering what I'm asking in return, dear, you'll be glad to know that my demands are small. Say it's me that you'll adore for now and evermore. That's all. That's all.